Chapter 63, Queen of the Hive, Part 1. The terrible thumping and crashing above continued, the continuous impacts against the shield forever unending until it's crippling. The changelings were simply never going to give up until the shield fell, until the ponies gave in. The swarm was relentless, out for blood and victory before the day was out. The last day to be brought about by the Princess of the Sun, and the first ended by a changeling who would go on to rule all. That was the future they had set in motion. It was the future they would stop at nothing to achieve. It was the future that a specific few were ready to prevent. Celestia guarded over those few, a golden glow shimmering over the doorway into the war room, a shield to keep out any who would try and force access. The barrier outside had yet to fall, but the risk was already high enough without taking some extra precautions.
"Sister?"
Celestia called out questioningly to Princess Luna.
"Progress?"
Luna's eyes were closed tightly in concentration, standing over the slumbering forms of the element bearers. Cardus, Panacea, and Uvena sat nervously next to them, awaiting their part to play.
"Steadily,"
Luna responded, pointing her horn towards the changelings.
"I can feel them. I am proceeding with the connection."
Princess Miyamori Cadenza flinched as another almighty crash sounded overhead. Sweat and pain were visible upon her features, and yet she remained unwavering despite the discomfort.
"Just tell me when,"
Cadence stated.
"I've picked out a location. I hope Shining and the others are ready." "They will be,"
Celestia affirmed, looking down towards Twilight's friends hopefully.
"They will be."
As the magical process took place within the war room, those who stood ready to defend them looked up at the shimmering cyan shield above them. The swarm seemed to cover almost every inch of its surface, trying to force their way in. Most were firing their green bolts of mana at the structure, though some formed their own magical barriers around themselves and slammed roughly into the shield. It held, but every single strike drained the Princess of Love's magic that little bit more. Shining Armor certainly held worry for his beloved wife, but nevertheless remained focused on what was to come. "A small section should begin to crack at any moment," Shining Armor announced. "It will close again once my wife is ready. I can't say how many changelings will come through before it closes, so be ready." He stood with the captains, Spike, and Facade, just in front of the castle's main entrance. Civilians were still being herded past them by the guards, moved to the designated safe area within the castle. A small army of armored ponies stood alongside the five, one of the many defensive positions set up throughout the city by both the guard and the resident EUP personnel.
"There's something oddly hypnotic watching all of them up there,"
Facade commented.
"Working together in such a fashion."
"Sure you don't want to hop in up there with them, Facade?" Spike jabbed.
"Just because I can appreciate such precise hive coordination doesn't mean that I want to be part of it,"
Facade shot back.
"I thought you'd be able to appreciate such organization, Spike."
"Well, Twilight had to affect their hive mind somehow. Celestia knows how many checklists they have," Shining Armor lightly joked, though didn't look back at them.
"Oh, I'd much prefer if the real article were here."
"You might be about to get your wish," Broadsword noted, pointing up at the segment of the shield that seemed to shift into a far duller shade of blue than the rest. Sure enough, an extremely narrow segment of the shield appeared to fluctuate and lose a little bit of the immense power being broadcasted into the rest of it. And if the ponies below could notice it, you could bet your life that the changelings did as well. The hive began to twist and turn around that small section, moving aside as two changeling queens quickly flew through their drones. Queen Twilight and Queen Vulgaris. Their horns lit up, the queens pressing the tips together before firing out a bright beam of magic colored a mix of green and lavender. The strike cascaded forward, impacting against the weak link of the cyan surface, cracks beginning to form and spread from the continuous force applied. The drones then joined in, focusing their attacks onto that segment with renewed ferocity. Several more cracks cropped up from the separate attacks before they spread enough that it became one large scar. And then it shattered. Cyan shards of hardened light shot inwards, breaking apart as they fell rapidly towards the surface of the mountain. Fortunately, the magic failed, and they disintegrated into nothingness before hitting the city. But there was now a clear view of the sky through the new hole in the once majestic barrier. A sky filled with all too many changelings. The queens wasted no time in shooting forwards towards the already sealing wound, the drones around them falling in line and following them in. The duo passed by the barrier, coming into the interior with their forces not far behind. Any civilians who saw the sight must have started their screams anew. A portion of the black mass now breaching their defenses and beginning to spread throughout the besieged city. But, like a nurse tending to the cuts upon a patient's body, the gap in the shield was stitched closed. A last few changeling drones managed to trickle on in before that happened. But then the cyan surface was complete once more. The remaining drones who had been attempting entry all collided with a solid mass. But not to be deterred, they shook off the impact and returned back to their original formations, continuing to fire at the city until the next time it was to falter. But the black forms now raining death upon Canterlot from the inside were certainly a sight to behold. They may not have been a large enough force to prize the city from the ponies, but they were easily enough to cause some intense havoc in the meantime. And Twilight and Vulgaris' power was not to be dismissed out of hoof. Green bolts of magic began to strike at the city, damaging homes and businesses alike as some ponies within began to return fire. Arrows shot up at the sky alongside monobolts of various colors from the unicorns. But while some were content to lay waste to the city itself, others headed straight towards the castle. "Here they come!" Vladimir shouted, his weapons at the ready. The first few changelings landed, hissing ferally at the ponies. A monobolt struck an earth pony right next to Broadsword, while a changeling lunged for the captain of the Solar Guard. He ducked under the attack, the changeling moving over him and receiving a buck from the captain's hind legs. He was knocked out instantly, crashing down to the floor. Another drone, this one with a blade, locked weapons with shining armor. The prince fired a bolt of magic at his assailant, the drone seeing the glow of his horn and rolling away to safety. He was met with Facade, however, and the duel was on. Their blades clanged as they deflected one another, Facade noting with sorrow that the drone was adorned in red armor, much like himself. "I'm sorry, brother." Facade apologized to his former brother in arms, sidestepping a strike and driving his own blade into the changeling's throat. He just had to hope he wouldn't find his actual brother among those within the city. He wasn't sure he'd be able to take that. He had already lost his eldest years prior. He wasn't ready to lose a second and final sibling. 2 more ponies were struck down by a group of drones in the air above them, the equestrians diving for cover as they continued to rain their spells down upon them. Only for every single one of them to be consumed within superheated fire, a spike flew by, leaving their charred carcasses to fall back towards the ground. The dragon looked towards more of the oncoming drones, his bellowing roar echoing out towards them. Had they been of free minds, they may have faltered at that, but the Empress's will drove them forward with an almost suicidal fury. And then she was there. Spike stared, dumbstruck, at the sight of Twilight Sparkle hovering opposite him. So dazed was he that he might not have avoided her magic, had an alabaster Pegasus not bitten onto the end of his tail and dragged him downwards. "Ah!" Spike shouted as he plummeted for a moment before flapping his wings to steady himself. "You're welcome," Broadsword replied, not enjoying the texture of dragon scales. "Shining, your sister!" "I see her," Shining Armor replied in dread. "Take cover!" Another furious beam of magic trailed through the pony's position, frying those who could not get out of the way in time. Twilight landed directly center of the ponies around her, her predatory gaze looking over them. They were taking cover wherever they could. Some hid behind barricades, others behind the foliage decorating the sides of the pathway leading to the main entrance, while even more were just inside the entrance itself. A few were without cover, still battling the incoming changelings. They drew the Changeling Queen's direct attention.
Twilight Sparkle!
The royal Canterlot voice boomed out from the castle, drawing all eyes towards it. And there, at the entrance, stood Princess Luna herself. She was glaring regally at the controlled Changeling Queen, almost like she was challenging her.
Princess Luna,
Empress Immortalis said from within Twilight's mouth.
I'm glad you're saving us the trouble. Our business from the Hive was yet to be concluded,
Luna announced, twin blades of pure magic forming either side of her.
And as they do say in this modern era, pick on some pony your own size. As you wish,
The changeling purred, now in her own voice. A beam of lavender struck forth, Luna simply stepping to one side as it streaked on by. She then fired 2 bolts of magic back at her opponent, and then flew after them into the castle's entrance hall. Twilight gave chase, forming a sword of her own, the blades of magic striking off against one another and creating heated sparks every time they did. Twilight swung wide, tearing through a tapestry before stabbing at Luna's barrel. Luna responded by teleporting behind Twilight, raising her blades above her head and then bringing them down onto the Changeling Queen. Twilight blocked both blades with her own, locking them in place. As they dueled, the Changelings continued to assault the ponies outside, uninterested in what took place between the 2 royals. Twilight kicked Luna away, flashing her dangerous fangs.
Where's your sister, Luna? Don't tell me she's hiding beneath the sheets. My sister has obligations that cannot be ignored,
Luna replied, avoiding another strike and delivering one of her own.
I do not need her, however, as I am more than a match for you.
Twilight snorted, ducking under Luna's neck strike and bucking her into the nearest wall.
Not as I recall. Oh, and I remember how hopeless you were at your first nightmare night. I remember how weak and timid you were when we hit you with the elements of harmony, where you ran to your sister for protection. Silence, cur!
Luna bellowed, moving back into the fight and firing several bolts of magic.
I shall not listen to the planted, poisoned words of the Empress. Nothing of what you speak is real, not as you are now. I'm far more than you,
Twilight rebutted, charging at Luna and tackling her. Twilight pinned her down, snapping her fangs before being kicked off to one side with a grunt. Luna rolled back onto her hooves, backing off further into the castle. The princess turned, confident that Twilight would follow her, and used her wings to propel her further inwards.
And so she flees,
Twilight jeered, quickly moving to give chase. But with their fight not yet finished, neither was the skirmish occurring just outside the main entrance itself. Changeling and ponies continued to throw themselves into the melee, the guard doing their damnedest not to let any more drones in. So far so good, Vladimir remarked, having spotted the Changeling Queen and Princess of the Night move further into the castle. We're getting swamped here! He ducked under one mana bolt as a drone charged him, igniting the blade in his prosthetic wing and bisecting the changeling. But as he fell, yet more followed him towards death. Fall back into the entrance hall! Shining Armor commanded, he and the remaining ponies quickly rushing inside. They didn't move far, however, turning just after making it within the castle walls. Several spells shot out and hit some of the changelings trying to follow them in, striking them down. They had only moved from the front courtyard to the entrance hall, and did not have any immediate intentions to give up further ground. Shining Armor felt pretty confident that they could hold that position for as long as needed with their numbers, even as the changelings kept on coming. But even as they held that line, other non-direct entrances to the castle were also being breached. Changelings swarmed onwards without hesitation or mercy on their minds, pressing against defenders guarding all of the castle's many entrances. Some were holding out, like Shining Armor's group, while others were beginning to crumble as their attackers made it further and further inside. They would have to contend with further guards within, but the further in they got, the closer they were towards the civilians taking shelter. They still could not hope to take the castle as a whole with the numbers they had. That would have to wait until the rest of the swarm had their turn. But the potential civilian casualties that might happen should the drones reach too far in? That was something none of the defending ponies wanted to think about. Fire lit up the entranceway as Spike denied access to one of the attacking groups, with one fortunate drone who'd avoided a fiery demise instead being cut down by Broadsword's blade. Another fired a bolt of magic that hit the large door, before one of the other defending unicorns knocked them from the sky. And then everything was silent. Heavy breaths were all that could be heard by those who defended the main entrance, each expecting another changeling to charge and decide at any moment. But things remained quiet. Unnervingly so.
Did we get them all?
Facade asked.
I swear there were more than that inside the city.
You can still hear the spellfire, Broadsword pointed out. There's still more out there.
Then where have they gone?
Don't ask that, Spike groaned. That's just making me nervous. Maybe they're focusing on the other entrances? Vladimir suggested. Some of the others might not be doing so great. Possibly, Shining replied. But this is still the most direct route. I would expect them to keep trying for it, at least to whittle us down. Sir! One of the members of the Solar Guard shouted in alarm, pointing to the shape of the rapidly descending Changeling Queen. Vulgaris landed hard enough to crack the ground beneath her hooves, raising a green shield to intercept the volleys of arrows and magic that were immediately sent her way. She only smiled, and then struck forwards faster than any of them could react. With her shield still up, she slammed through them as if they were bowling pins, sending them to the floor all around the entranceway. She then twisted around, facing them all with a wide, demented smirk.
Shining armor,
Empress Immortalis said in Vulgaris's body.
Captain Broadsword, Captain Vladimir, Spike the Dragon. Yes, I know of you. You would be quite the thorns in my side should I let you live. So I won't.
So you're the Empress? Shining Armor growled. Release my sister!
She is where she should be,
Immortalis replied, glancing over at Facade.
Where you should be, little drone.
I'll pass, Facade replied defiantly.
You don't get to pass on natural order.
Hey! Spike shouted, drawing the Empress's attention. Twilight's stronger than you think. She will get out, and soon.
You share her futile optimism. Has anyone ever told you how tiring it gets?
We're not afraid of you, Empress, Shining stated, pointing his blade at her, as did the others. We'll defy you to the end.
I know,
Immortalis replied, looking over the four standing at the head of the group. Wait. 4? A heavy impact to Vulgaris' head sent the Changeling Queen to the floor, Facade having just emerged out of a portal and propelled his hoof into her face. Her shield raised once more as she came under heavy fire, all the ponies as well as the dragon and changeling opening up on her.
So be it,
Immortalis hissed, sending a wave of magic cascading into Facade and sending him hurtling backwards.
With Vulgaris as my proxy, I shall crush you, and any hope that foolish Changeling Queen has of freedom.
The drones started up their assault once again, hurling themselves at the entrance as the defenders suddenly found themselves between an extreme rock and an impossibly hard place. "Ponies, keep that entrance covered!" Prince Shining Armor commanded to the guards accompanying them before turning to his friends. "You guys, we've got her." "Right behind you, Shining," Vladimir confirmed, his sword ready and his hidden weapon hissing out of his wing. So, with the guards covering the door, the others moved towards Vulgaris. Shining Armor, Broadsword, Vladimir, Spike, and Facade all circled the snarling changeling queen. And then both parties struck. The element bearers remained in their blissful sleep, Princess Celestia sitting over their prone forms protectively. Her sister and Princess Cadence had both departed, the former having gone to ensure Twilight was where they needed her to be, and the latter had retreated to the safe zone. The changelings, too, had been taken to their own required position, awaiting what was to happen next. Celestia had remained. She couldn't leave the 5 ponies before her alone, unprotected. However much she would like to be protecting her ponies outside, at that moment, those specific 5 had to take priority. She closed her eyes with a small sigh. She could still hear the constant crashes outside, the shield buckling a little more from every small, little impact it received. Each moment brought Equestria closer to its doom, and each moment brought them closer to that one singular moment. The moment that would decide everything. Victory or defeat, life or death. She had experienced such a worrying event many times over. Twilight's confrontation with Nightmare Moon. The element bearers' near corruption by Discord. The duel between Queen Twilight and Queen Crudelis. Each time, they had succeeded. But each subsequent time, Celestia couldn't help but fear that it would be the one where they did not win. Would this be that time? Then Celestia's eyes shot open, a gasp escaping her lips. She was there again, but stronger than before. In her mind's eye, she could see Twilight sparkle. Luna was giving her the runaround, Twilight firing furiously at her, trying to silence the alicorn for good. But she was weeping. On the inside, the true Twilight Sparkle was weeping. In pain. Terrible pain at the knowledge of her own actions, while being unable to prevent them. She was there, right in front of Celestia. She was there, yet she wasn't. It was so clear, and yet so impossible. How could this be? How did she keep seeing her like that? And then it hit her. Through Immortalis, Daybreaker was forcing her way into the hive mind. She didn't stop to take in the sights. She knew she would only have a limited time within the Empress's realm. Searching quickly, she reached out throughout the hive mind and searched for one very specific presence, and it didn't take her long to find it. One pulsating lavender orb. Twilight's consciousness. Daybreaker practically galloped towards it, placing her long white horn against the orb and forming a connection with it. Celestia looked down upon the image of Twilight, a single tear rolling down her cheek. She knelt down next to her, unable to touch her.
I reached you,
Celestia whispered.
Before the Empress took me away, I touched your soul. And part of me never left.
A part of Celestia had remained behind within the Empress's hive mind, latched onto Twilight. Hidden away from the Empress, faint, but very much there. Celestia could feel her pain and desire to break free, to help those she loved. She could see the chains of the Empress's making, restraining her and keeping her will beaten and hollow. Her daughter was in so much pain. but Celestia had a direct line. She was still in there. And she now knew what she had to do.